Welcome to a Legendarium special about the history of pumpkins and pumpkin pie. In this installment, we will trace the evolution of the pumpkin pie through the centuries. It is hard to imagine an American Thanksgiving table without an orange-crusted custard made from strained, spiced, and twice-cooked squash. Few festive foods can claim deeper American roots than pumpkins, first grown in Central America around 5500 BC. They are both a fruit and a squash, with yellow-orange flowers that bloom on their vines. Indigenous Americans grew and ate pumpkins and their seeds long before Europeans came. Like much else, Europeans took them back home during their colonization of the Americas. The orange gourds first mentioned in Europe dates to 1536, and within a few decades they appeared in farm fields across England. Their growers called them pompions, after the French pompon, a reference to their round form. Pumpkins, as Americans grew to call them, quickly became part of England's pie-making culture, which had for centuries made stuffed pastries in sweet and savory varieties. When the Pilgrims sailed for North America on the Mayflower in 1620, some may have known as much about pumpkins as the Wampanoag, who helped them to survive their first year at Plymouth. A year later, when 90 Wampanoag joined the 50 surviving colonists for a 3-day harvest celebration, it is likely that pumpkin appeared on the table. While pumpkins could be made into bread, colonists preferred to make them into pies. At the time, pumpkin pie existed in many forms, only a few of which are familiar to us today. Early settlers like the Puritans made pies by hollowing out pumpkins, filling the shell with milk, honey, spices, or apples, and then baking it. They also dried pumpkin shells, cut them into strips, and wove them into mats. A 1653 French cookbook instructed chefs to boil pumpkins in milk and strain it before putting it into a crust. In her book Gentlewoman's Companion, English writer Hannah Woolley described a pie filled with alternating layers of pumpkin and apple, spiced rosemary, sweet marjoram, and a handful of thyme. Sometimes cooks did not use crusts at all. One early New England recipe involved filling a hollowed-out pumpkin with spiced, sweetened milk and then cooking it directly over a fire. An English version of the same preparation had the pumpkin stuffed with sliced apples. By the early 18th century, pumpkin pie earned a regular place at the table as Thanksgiving became an important New England holiday. In 1705, the Connecticut town of Colchester postponed its Thanksgiving for a week because it did not have enough molasses available to make pumpkin pie. Amelia Simmons' pioneering 1796 book American Cookery contained 2 pumpkin pie recipes, one similar to our modern custard version. Popular folklore even held that eating pumpkin or its seeds cured freckles and snake bites. Yet it would not be until the mid-19th century that pumpkin pie rose to political significance in the United States. It entered the United States' tumultuous debate over slavery and its expansion into the West. Many of the staunchest abolitionists came from New England, and their favorite dessert soon found mention in novels, poems, and broadsides. Sarah Josepha Hale, an abolitionist who worked for decades to have Thanksgiving proclaimed a national holiday, featured the pie in her 1827 anti-slavery novel, Northwood. It spent a chapter describing a Thanksgiving table laden with desserts of every name and description. However, the author wrote, "Yet the pumpkin pie occupied the most distinguished niche." In 1842, another abolitionist named Lydia Maria Child wrote her famous poem about a New England Thanksgiving that began, "Over the river and through the wood," and ended with, "Hurrah for the pumpkin pie!" Small wonder that when Abraham Lincoln made Thanksgiving a national holiday in 1863, observers in the Confederacy saw it as a move to impose Northern traditions upon the South. A snide writer in Richmond, Virginia, wrote for the newspaper, "This is an annual custom of that people, heretofore celebrated with devout oblations to themselves of pumpkin pie and roast turkey." After the Civil War, Thanksgiving and pumpkin pie extended its national reach, bolstered by write-ups in women's magazines like the one Hale edited. During the late 1800s, Libby, McNeil, and Libby started as a canned meat company in Chicago, Illinois. It would only bring canned pumpkin into its fold during the 1920s when it purchased Dickinson and Company of Eureka, Illinois. During the 1920s, pumpkin enjoyed a moment of fame as a symbol of fast disappearing rural life, and pumpkins and pumpkin pie became a nostalgia food. In 1929, Libby's Canned Meat Company introduced a line of canned pumpkin that soon became a Thanksgiving fixture. It ended the need to roast and strain one's own squash. Libby's hired a recipe developer named Mary Hale Martin to promote recipes for its canned products. The pumpkin pie recipe that Libby's and Martin developed appeared on the back of a Libby's can in 1929. It called for canned pumpkin, eggs, milk, sugar, cloves, allspice, and cinnamon. In the 1950s, the recipe changed to the version most know today, including dried ginger and evaporated milk, which cuts the cooking time and brings about a more intense flavor. Today, Libby's is the headquarters in Morton, Illinois, which calls itself the pumpkin capital of the world. Thus, the combined labors of industrialists, editors, housewives, anti-slavery activists, and Mesoamerican agriculturalists made pumpkin pie possible for everybody. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.